de-escalate, as I've said. We are going to be doing the work that matters in continuing to have constructive relations with India through this extremely difficult time.
The Financial Times reporting Canada has been told to repatriate 41 of its 62 diplomats in India by October 10th. The Prime Minister didn't confirm the report, and ties between the two countries have been frayed since Trudeau told Parliament that they have credible evidence that Indian government's agents were linked to the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey in June.
I want to bring in two former Foreign Affairs ministers to talk about the potential consequences of this happening. John Manley was also a former Liberal Deputy Prime Minister. He's now a Senior Business Advisor with Bennett Jones. And Peter MacKay was also a former Conservative Defence Minister. He's now a Strategic Advisor for Deloitte and McInnes Cooper. Hello to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time for this conversation. Mr. Manley, I'll start with you. The government and the Foreign Affairs Minister there has, not confirmed specifically that this is happening, but certainly also said it's not. They're not being asked to do it. Does India taking a move like this surprise you at all, given what's unfolded over the last 2 weeks?
Well, it's surprising in the size of it and the gravity of it. I think we all knew that there were tensions, but I think this is an indication that the government of India is exceptionally unhappy with Canada, and it's going to make it that much more difficult for us to patch things up once inevitably we are in a position where we want to do that.
Mr. MacKay, from a pragmatic perspective, I'm just thinking of when either of you were in the role, if all of a sudden the majority of your diplomatic staff had to be removed from a country like India, the effect that would have on the ground. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's very difficult, Vashi. I mean, it's not on par with what's happening here. We closed our embassy in Iran at one point for all kinds of reasons, including security reasons. But I think John's point is correct, that this is an indication that India is furious, still looking to punish Canada. And it will have an impact, of course, on the ability for Indians to travel home and for visas to be granted to Canadians. But given that no more visas are going to be granted to Canadians visiting India, that would lessen the load at the Canadian embassy. It's not a good sign, clear, that we are anywhere near resolving the tension and de-escalating what has been a significant diplomatic spat.
Mr. Manley, that point around de-escalation, we heard both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Affairs Minister talk about that today. Short of there actually being a conviction or even a charge laid, for example, or a conclusion to the RCMP's investigation, is de-escalation at this point possible?
It's very hard to see how they can de-escalate unless they swallow themselves whole and back off from the statement that the Prime Minister made in the House of Commons. And I think what causes many to have concerns about that statement is the lack of information that's included and that has been made public. As you say, no one has been charged with this crime, and therefore it's very hard for the world to see that our accusations are substantiated in fact. So the sooner that somebody can be charged and fully identified, and ideally, from our position, linked to the government of India, the more likely it is that we can begin to move this process onward.
Mr. MacKay, in the absence of any real ability to de-escalate, how important do the actions of our allies become? And I say that in light, for example, of Secretary of State Antony Blinken meeting with his counterpart late last week and saying in a statement to our news outlet that he did in fact raise this and ask India to cooperate. Is it going to take basically more pressure from our allies to advance what we're hoping to see happen?
I don't know that pressure will do it, Vashi. I mean, it doesn't hurt to have our allies calling for calm and trying to get the parties back together. The reality is that the allegation, and it was a serious allegation to quote the Prime Minister, is a bit of a contradiction when we're asking India to cooperate in an open murder investigation. It's also a bit contradictory to hear the Foreign Minister, Melanie Joly, saying that the diplomatic discussions have to happen quietly now. This was about as unquiet a diplomatic intervention from the Prime Minister that I think we've seen in our country's history. And so I think this poses significant problems to get past it. We won't talk about the trade implications or the cooperation in the future. We're members of the Commonwealth together, G20 countries, a diplomacy like this, a diplomatic brouhaha like this, has all kinds of knock-on effects. And so it's going to take a lot of hard work by diplomats and security individuals to get things back on track, in my opinion.
Mr. Manley, if in fact these allegations do prove to be true, and I interviewed the U.S. ambassador just a few weeks ago who did confirm that it was shared intelligence that led to, or rather that informed the accusation that the Prime Minister leveled. If in fact they are true, are there also potential consequences for India, or is its strategic importance geopolitically such that it might counter the fallout you would expect?
Well, I think that most countries who are trying to court India are going to say this is Canada's problem and it's really a bad thing that happened, but it doesn't involve us. I mean, the reality of the world is that that's kind of how it works. And I think despite Mr. Blinken's intervention, we have to be aware that India is of very great strategic importance to the United States at this point in time, as they try to build a world order in which China is less critical to the global interests, global supply chains, and global diplomacy. So I don't think we can count on allies for very much in this case. I think if we produce hard evidence, then it will certainly it will advance our cause. But that evidence, this allegation was not based on police evidence. This was based on intelligence that came from security sources. That may not be enough to get a conviction in a criminal court where you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. So let's hope that we in fact do have the facts on this, because it'll be terribly embarrassing if we don't.
Let me reframe the question. Last word to you, Mr. McKay. If in fact that intelligence does show evidence and does provide conclusive results linking, and the allegation is serious, linking the government of India to the murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil, should there be consequences for India?
Well, I think yes, but again, we're a long way from that point. I mean, reasonable allegations or serious allegations don't even meet the standard of arrest. And so this is an open murder investigation. I have to say that again for emphasis. And making sort of the bold accusation against an entire government, there's all sorts of things that go on inside a government. In fact, there are defenses perhaps of a rogue element here, for example. This is in uncharted waters in terms of what has happened. But I share the concern of many that this has very dire consequences for those of us who are working within the Five Eyes. If our allies are not willing to invest their political capital in Canada, can be isolated. And that has a big impact, as John said, when it comes to our country and others trying to pivot away from China and do more business in India and do more actual diplomacy and reliance on a partner like India.
India is demanding the withdrawal of Canadian diplomats. That's according to a report in the Financial Times. The report also says Delhi is threatening to revoke diplomatic immunity for any Canadian staffers who fail to leave the country by October 10th. Ties between the two nations have fallen apart over the murder of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Canadian citizen the Indian government calls a terrorist. Earlier this month, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau angered Delhi by publicly accusing Indian government agents for the killing. Nijjar was shot dead by masked gunmen outside a Sikh temple near Vancouver in June. Delhi denied any involvement, dismissing Canada's allegations as ridiculous. Also fears over safety. DW spoke to Sikhs in Toronto.
We feel safe in this country. Our families are safe. So that's why all of us living in the world, they prefer this country too, because it's safe for our Sikh community.
Both the countries can survive without each other, like not even India, not even Canada. So I guess everything's gonna be good.
More Sikhs live in Canada than anywhere in the world outside the northern Indian state of Punjab. 770,000 strong, a small handful of the community supports a movement for an independent state of Khalistan carved out from India. The vast majority of the diaspora rejects the movement. The diplomatic fallout has many Canadian Sikhs far more worried about the impact it will have for them in Canada. And over in South Asia, the same...
Nobody demands Khalistan. People just want good jobs, a better life and a good system. People are happy.
But tensions over the killing...
The Khalistan separatist movement is rooted in the Indian state of Punjab. It peaked back in the 1980s, early 1990s. It's been fueled by local grievances, but also by support from Pakistan. We've seen a revival of sorts in recent years, fueled by a nexus with organized crime and drug smuggling, combined with economic challenges in the state of Punjab. But it's nowhere near where it was, say, 3 decades ago. And the Khalistani movement is arguably stronger outside India than it is within the country today.
Why do you think Delhi is escalating things with this latest diplomatic move against Canada?
So I think, what we have seen is the relationship is on a downward spiral. We've seen a tit-for-tat escalation by the Canadian and Indian governments. Latest development is that India is demanding that Canada scale down its diplomatic presence. But I think what's surprising is to see such a public spat between two countries that are not adversaries. So until recently, Canada and India have been pursuing deepening relations. We have, of course, seen similar tensions between Canada and China, for instance, in the past. But here are two countries that are both democracies. They're both claimed to be responsible global powers. They're both advocates of the rules-based international order. And they're both close partners with the United States. And I think that's what makes this a particularly difficult situation. And in terms of your question, I think it's indicative of India pursuing a more assertive and muscular foreign policy. So it's a country that's showing itself to be more prone to taking offense to actions that challenge its sovereignty and status, and more prone to taking retaliation to such actions.
To what